All right. Thanks to everybody who's joining us. We're going to get started here with a couple of housekeeping things and then on to our topic for the evening. All right. So welcome to our continuing education series, Joining Forces, Empowering Voices, a collaborative approach to supporting adults using high-tech AAC. My name is Erin Edwards, and we welcome anybody joining us live or asynchronously later. Throughout the series, you'll find that we're passionate about building greater collaboration between BCBAs and SLPs. So all of our webinars will offer CEUs for both professions. We're also invested in improving services for adults with disabilities. So many of the examples and discussions in our presentations are going to focus on adults, but the interventions and techniques can be applied to children as well in most cases. And finally, we're passionate about the potential of high-tech AAC. So all of our webinars will include information on that type of communication. This CEU series is brought to you through the generosity of the Edith L. Trees Charitable Trust. We're very grateful for their support and this opportunity to bring you some amazing speakers over the next year. We hope this makes a difference in your practice as a professional and in turn makes a difference in the lives of the people you support. A couple important CEU information. I'll put the instructions to get CEUs in the Q&A, and you'll also receive them in a follow-up email from the event tomorrow through the Zoom registration. If you're new to our series, I'll let you know you will need to create a profile, login, and password to our learning management system website before you can access the quiz and the evaluations that you need to do to get the CEUs. But there's a step-by-step walkthrough on how to do this on our website, which is this one, the Joining Forces, Empowering Voices. And it's under the Earning CEUs tab. So it takes a minute or two to get set up. But in addition to tonight, we're going to have 2 more live and at least 3 more asynchronous CEUs events added in 2025. We already have several on there now. So check out our website to register for more live or access the asynchronous CEUs. And finally, if you have any technical questions or issues completing the post work to get your CEUs, please use this email, the Autism AAC PSU at pennstatehealth.psu.edu to let us know, and we will help you out. If you have any questions during the presentation, please put them in the Q&A. We are going to be watching along and asking questions. I'll be interrupting kind of and asking questions to our speaker as needed through the event. So it's perfectly fine to add your question when you're thinking about it so we can discuss it. You might also see some comments or questions labeled clarifiers put into the Q&A. Since we know we have a mixed audience of SLPs and BCBAs, we know that there's sometimes different vernacular going on. So our team might add some comments or questions to make sure that both professions are understanding the material the same, even if they typically use different words to talk about the concepts. So please feel free to do that as well as an audience member. Now it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Jonathan Ivey. Dr. Ivey is an associate professor of psychology at Penn State Harrisburg. Dr. Ivey received his doctorate in applied behavior analysis and special education from The Ohio State University in 2011 and master's degree in applied behavior analysis from the Penn State University in 2005. He has worked with individuals who engage in severe challenging behaviors at the group and individual level for nearly 2 decades. He has helped parents and professionals develop and implement comprehensive behavior change programs designed to increase functional skills and decrease challenging behaviors. He has served as a consultant for school districts, youth residential programs, behavioral health agencies, and partial hospitalization programs to address a wide range of needs. In 2013, Dr. Ivey was nominated president of the Pennsylvania Association for Behavior Analysis, or PEN-ABA. After serving his term as president of PEN-ABA, the executive council asked Dr. Ivey to serve as the director of outreach and strategic planning. In this role, Dr. Ivey has been closely involved in initiatives to license behavior analysts in the state of Pennsylvania, including speaking at the press conference for Pennsylvania House Bill 1900. Dr. Ivey regularly gives professional presentations at national conferences and has an active research agenda with multiple publications in peer-reviewed journals. His areas of interest include complex systems of reinforcement, such as token economies, group-oriented contingencies, innovative interventions to teach functional skills or treat problem behavior, and teaching behavior analysis. Dr. Ivy also enjoys following the research interests of his students. So we are so honored and pleased to have Dr. Ivy with us today. With that, I will turn it over to you, Jonathan, to get us started.
Thank you so much for that introduction. Uh, Greatly appreciate that. It's a pleasure to be with you tonight. On the screen now, you see the learning objectives for this talk as well as my disclosures. I just want to note that I am a co-investigator for this project, and so I have that connection related to my work and collaboration. First, I want to wholeheartedly welcome you to this presentation. The entire Joining Forces team is grateful for your participation in this event. So often, behavior analysts and speech and language pathologists operate in these artificially manufactured silos. I think to anyone listening, you know exactly what I'm referring to. These kind of silos can result in programming that is unnecessarily fragmented and ultimately inefficient. So, a goal of this talk, and then more broadly this series, is to establish common ground. This way, we can meaningfully join forces. I incorporated the talk title into that. I hope you all caught that. That way, we can meaningfully join forces and develop effective and efficient programming, the best programming possible for those that we serve. And to that end, before I really jump into the content for tonight, I just want to give you all a little bit of context in terms of where I'm coming from. And I do this to help us in the future with those collaborative relationships with professionals from other disciplines. So I'm a behavior analyst. I was trained as a behavior analyst formally in my master's education. I was formally trained in behavior analysis when I was getting my PhD. I see the world through a behavior analytic lens, not just at work, but at home. It drives my family crazy. So I say that because I want to call attention that I approach the study of language and communication from a behavioral perspective. Now, what this means for this talk is I may use terms or concepts that are perhaps a little bit different than how other disciplines may approach that very same topic. Now, these differences are not designed, nor should they divide us. A guiding value of this project is to share information about our respective disciplines so that we are better positioned to meaningfully collaborate and truly develop the best programs possible. Throughout the session, the members of the project team may offer some translation of terms and concepts that I use. And I also invite all of you to ask questions as we go throughout the session. It's been a long time since I've given an asynchronous or a video conference. I wish I could be with all of you in person, but this modality is really best suited to getting this out there. I say all that because I truly do invite all of your questions. If you're having a head scratching moment, it's probably something I said, and please give me the opportunity to allow me to clarify and extend. Despite the differences in our professional training and perhaps even differences in philosophical positions, I'm always heartened and I always try to call attention to the fact that we are bound by a similar purpose. That is to develop and implement the most effective programs possible. And if we make that the center of our work, if we make that the focus of our work, what I found is these professional differences really are just secondary to perhaps putting forth the best program possible. Now, regarding those we serve, and at risk of stating what is an obvious point, adults with autism who use AAC, they're not a monolith. They are a highly diverse set of individuals. The topics and examples contained in this workshop are based largely on my own clinical experience. I understand that there are a myriad of AAC technologies which incorporate a wide range of learning interfaces, such as eye gaze, switch manipulation, and touch. And then individuals who use AAC have very diverse repertoires and needs. So as I'm going through this presentation, I encourage you to think of and attempt to develop your own examples as we explore various critical concepts and ideas from a behavioral perspective. Try to take these concepts and extend them to the situations and the variables that best represent the settings and the individuals that you serve. Now, before I go forward, I'm going to turn to my team. Am I coming through loud and clear? You're seeing the slides. Everything's good? Excellent. It's always a little bit weird doing this in a vacuum. This talk requires we delve into some what are some very complex and nuanced topics. What scares me about this talk is I have about an hour and 15 minutes. This is the kind of talk where I might usually have 3 hours or perhaps multiple sessions. I used to teach a grad course on the analysis of verbal behavior, and we had 15 weeks for that. So I'm going to try to squeeze a lot of very dense information in a short period of time. I've done my very best to translate and decipher these topics. Um, I've done so in a way that I hope maintains the precision of the idea, the concept, the technology, but ensures broad approachability by any professional that might be attending this event. That said, as we're going through the evening, please enter your questions into the Q&A. The team is going to monitor that throughout, and as is relevant, we'll take those questions in the moment. In preparing for this talk, I was doing a little background research, and I came across a statistic that I was surprised about. I learned that between 23 and 35% of individuals diagnosed with ASD are reported to have limited vocal communication, limited vocal speech. And these individuals are the ones who are typically given a high-tech AAC device to help augment their mode of communication. Now, I want to tell you a little story as I get started, and this is kind of an amalgamation. There really isn't a Tim. This really represents a lot of people that I've worked with over the years. And I'm going to tell you the sad part about this story just right up front. This story is not in singularity. This isn't a one-time observation. This is an observation that I've made throughout the years across multiple parts of the country, multiple parts of the state, time and time again. And to anyone who's here with me today, I feel pretty confident saying you've probably made this observation too. With that said, let me tell you a little bit about Tim. Tim is now a 35-year-old male diagnosed with autism. When Tim was a younger child, the clinical team working with Tim noticed that he engaged in very few vocal responses, and it was suggested that Tim be given an AAC device to help aid his communication. Now, during school years, although Tim often had his device with him in hand, there was very little formal instruction as to how to use the device. The device was always there, it was always charged, it was always offered. There was a lot of like incidental kind of teaching, but perhaps not the kind of teaching that Tim really needed to make full use of this mode of communication. Now that brings us back to today. Now Tim is an adult who has an AAC device and can really only request independently 2 to 3 different items. Here's the point of the story. Handing someone a high-tech device and expecting communication to just magically emerge is a serious disservice to those that we work with. Communication is perhaps one of the hardest skills that any of us engage in. And the individuals we work with deserve need a way of interacting with their world that's efficient and effective. Some of the individuals we work with are going to require direct and systematic formal assessment and training to help enable them to engage in a full, meaningful repertoire. So I hope that this series, I hope that this talk helps push us forward in how we help individuals like Tim develop truly functional and adaptive verbal repertoires. I've already said I approach this topic as a behavior analyst, and I'm going to provide a little context there. As a behavior analyst, I typically use the phrase analysis of verbal behavior to refer to the study of language and communication. I approach the study of language and communication by extending concepts of learning and principles to the ways that we interact with each other. Um, Now, verbal behavior is the phrase that a behavior analyst will often use to refer more broadly to language and communication. I've had many interactions, even with my team here, where we've had groups who refer to communication in one term, groups who refer to the communication in another term. We're all talking about the same stuff, but clarifying these terms can be helpful. Now, to the extent that we want to distinguish verbal behavior, say asking for help, from nonverbal behavior, say going to the kitchen and making a stack, the distinction really lies in how the response, how the behavior is established and maintained. And we're going to see that tonight in a few different examples. Verbal behavior is identical in concept to any other behavior that one might engage in. The difference is in how it comes to be and the way that it interacts with other people, particularly listeners. Another quality of verbal behavior is the learning history that allows a listener, you or me, to respond to the occurrence of verbal behavior. But I said this is a deep topic. That's a conversation for another time. The phrase verbal behavior coming out of the mouth of a behavior analyst does not denote a particular mode of communication, but rather refers to all forms of communication. So verbal is often equated to vocal, um, but most behavior analysts wouldn't necessarily equate those two things. When I say verbal, I'm referring to any mode of communication which may include things like gestures, vocalization, or writing. Just to name a few, there's more. We could perhaps conceptualize interpretive dance as a form of verbal behavior. Now, many modes of verbal behavior are topography based. The word topography is just a really fancy way of saying form, what the behavior looks like. Now, what this means is the verbal behavior of, for example, saying help. The strong man here is trying to open a pickle jar. It doesn't seem to be working. So he engages in the verbal behavior, here a vocal behavior, asking for help. And the phrase help affects the listener to deliver perhaps a consequence or come by and help in the situation to produce the desired outcome. A communication mode such as sign language, typing, and vocal speech are all examples of a form or topography based verbal behavior. Now, relevant to our discussion tonight about high-tech AAC, uh, some modes of verbal behavior are selection-based. Now, what this means is the verbal behavior affects the listener by extension of what stimulus or icon is selected. So if you're working with an individual who has an AAC device and they interact with it by touching an icon, the behavior of selecting the icon might produce some kind of vocal output, or perhaps we see the icon that's selected, and then we, as the listener, perhaps will engage in an action specified by that icon or based on context. For example, if someone were to touch the help icon, this may induce a listener to assist the individual with a given situation, perhaps opening a jar of pickles. Many users of AAC use icon touch as the primary mode of selection. Now, this is important because it has implications for how we might go about teaching and assessing an individual's verbal repertoire. These distinctions between a topography-based system and a selection-based system come with it certain realities. Since a selection-based response is essentially limited to the available items, we need to be very careful with what items are available, with what icons are available, and really making sure that the things that matter most are easily accessible with low response effort. Another big concept from an analysis of verbal behavior is this idea of functional independence. Functional independence is a really key guiding concept in how behavior analysts approach assessment and programming of verbal behavior. And said simply, functional independence is the idea that a given verbal response can occur for a broad range of reasons. And I think it's best if I just show you what I mean. So this is Sally. In a moment, we are going to observe Sally engage in a bit of behavior. The question that I put to you, the question I want you to ponder is, what is the purpose of Sally's behavior? Now, let me just be clear. This is purely a conceptual activity. In application, in clinical practice, it would be very dangerous to make an assumption about the purpose of behavior without thorough analysis. But this is more of a conceptual, hypothetical illustration of a concept. So here's the setup. It's been 4 hours since Sally last ate. She had lunch, and now we're at 4 p.m. Sally just got back from a long walk. Sally is currently in the kitchen with mom. And then in that context, Sally says, apple. Now, if you were in a class with me, I'd ask you to actually tell me what you think the purpose of this is. But think for a moment, what do you think Sally is trying to communicate with us? And I suspect all of us are on the same page. Based on the context, based on the situation, it's likely the case that Sally is asking mom for an apple. So the purpose of saying apple in this situation is to get an apple. Let's look at a different situation. Let's change the context a little bit. Now we're in a car on the way to the grocery store and with Sally's big sister. Sally's sister asked the question, what is the name of a red, juicy fruit? And in response, Sally says apple. It was the same word she said in the prior example. Again, the question we're trying to answer is, what is the purpose of this verbal behavior? I would suggest in this situation, Sally's not asking for an apple. Rather, Sally is engaging in a response based on the question asked by the sister. So same word, totally different purposes. Now, entertain me. We're going to do this one more time. Now let's imagine we're in an apple orchard with Sally's family. The family is out picking apples. I think this is the wrong season for this, by the way. I'm going to have to update this. This is more of a fall example. So we're out in the apple orchard, and it's the fall. There are apples on the tree, and the family's out looking for apples. Sally's walking around the trees, and Sally sees an apple, and she says the word apple. She sees an apple. She says apple. And so for the last time, I asked the question, what is the purpose of this verbal behavior? I would suggest that in this situation, she's not asking for an apple. I don't think she's answering a question. I think what's happening is Sally is just telling her family what she sees. Sally is engaging in a response, the word apple, indicating her experience with the world. Now here's the whole point of this illustration. And I warn you that this is a big idea with very profound implications. Although the structure of the word that we observed in the last three examples was identical, it was the same, I would assert from a behavioral position that those three occurrences of apple were actually totally different behaviors, functionally speaking. Although the response looked the same, although the phrase sounded the same, those were three different responses. What that means is when we're trying to assess verbal behavior, when we're trying to teach verbal behavior, we have to also be careful about the different purposes and the different reasons that an individual may engage in a verbal response, and make sure we are evaluating all those different reasons. Research has actually shown that just because an individual can say a word under a certain circumstance, let's say that I teach Sally to say the word apple in response to the question, what am I holding up? And it happens to be an apple. That doesn't mean that Sally can independently ask for the apple when she wants one. I've seen a lot of focus on teaching words, and that's good. We should teach words. But I would say it's critical that we focus on teaching words in the context that are most meaningful to the individuals that we work with. That means that someone can say apple or say any word when they want something, when they need something, but also when they're trying to describe their world to us. Now, I'm going to focus our time tonight on two different kinds of verbal behaviors. And I'm going to keep this technical, although I'm going to work to translate what are complex topics. I think everyone in the audience has probably heard of a mand and a tact. I'm going to do a little background on what those things are. A mand is the verbal term that a behavior analyst would use to refer to things commonly described as questions, requesting, asking, or demanding something. While a tact is the formal term we use to describe things like naming, labeling, or describing something in the environment. Let's look at each of these with greater focus and precision. When someone asks for help, something to eat or drink, or access to a particular item, they're likely manding, requesting. A mand is how someone expresses their wants and needs to a listener. A mand is best conceptualized not just as an occurrence of behavior, but rather a relationship between certain motivational variables and verbal behavior. For example, when Glenn is working on a project and the next step requires scissors, but scissors are out of sight and not currently accessible, this need creates a certain kind of motivational variable. This motivational variable has the effect of increasing the value of scissors and will also evoke behavior that has produced scissors in the past. In this case, that's Glenn going to his AAC device and hitting the icon associated with scissors. So that the behavior here is pressing the button, and that produces a certain kind of effect, a change to the environment. In that case, staff, in response to the icon pressing of scissors, perhaps will go get Glenn's scissors. And so the reinforcer is access to the item specified by the action. This is my 14-year-old son. I say 14 because he's hungry. He's always hungry. He's never not hungry. He comes home from school hungry. He wakes up hungry. When he comes home from school and I happen to be there, before he says hi to me, one of the first things he asks is for a snack. So you can imagine it's been a few hours, probably haven't been many hours, it's been a few hours since he ate. There's a motivation for food. Now he could just go to the kitchen and get it himself, but he engages in a vocal response. Dad, you go get me some food? And that might induce me to then engage in the action of preparing some food and giving him a snack. So the motivational variable is he's hungry, simply said, he engages in the request, and then I deliver the item specified by the request. Prior to developing any program, any instructional program to teach mands, it is critical that we first conduct a formal assessment of the individual's mand repertoire. Behavior analysts love to say repertoire. I think I like to say it's just a fancy way of saying like all the behaviors a person can do of a given category. So when I say mand repertoire, what I'm really saying is what are all the things a person can ask for? There are a variety of packaged assessments. I'm not going to go into any particular mode of evaluation. The main point is before you teach, you kind of need to know what currently the person can do, the skills they have for interacting with their world. And I would really suggest focusing your attention on those most important things first, and then building out from that later. So those most important things are, can the individual ask for the things they need in a given day? Those basic needs for health, safety, and well-being. Coupled with that, can the individual ask for things that they like and enjoy? If not, I think that's the perfect starting point for a program to help teach the individual how to ask for those things. But let's not also forget that all of us encounter things within a day that we might not like. Uh, when my son or my wife is doing something that I don't like, I can say like, "Hey, can you knock that off, or can you stop doing that?" I have ways of communicating that I don't like that, and I could ask them to engage in something else. Uh, there are times when, despite our very best attempts to create environments that are fun and enjoyable, to achieve the goal of habilitation, to achieve the goal of really functional, meaningful skills, sometimes we accidentally create conditions that maybe are not as fun as we think they are. It's important that we empower the individuals we work with to communicate with us like, hey, I don't like that, or can we stop that, or can I take a break from that? So I would encourage you to start here, before start with these three questions of evaluating needs, wants, and ways to escape or terminate as good starting points for your MAND assessment. I said this is going to be technical. This is where we kind of get into the technicality of it. It's important when we are conducting an evaluation of the MAND repertoire that we do so in context of the corresponding motivational variables. This is where a bunch of ideas come together. I introduced earlier this idea of functional independence. Somebody could say the word help, but they may not say the word help under the situation where they actually need help. So what this means is the behavior of maybe imitating someone, the behavior of making the sounds of help might be something somebody does, but perhaps they haven't had the experiences necessary to use that vocalization or that verbal response as a mand. So it's really important that when we conduct an assessment, but also when we try to teach a mand, that we do so in context of the proper motivational conditions. Otherwise, we're just teaching a word that someone may not actually use as a mand. I've been doing this for a long time. And I distinctly remember 10, 15 years ago, seeing this very heavy focus for those who are using AAC devices just to teach words. And the individual might engage in a lot of verbal behavior, but that verbal behavior never really became functional because it wasn't taught under the motivational conditions. There's a few different ways to approach this. So we could use natural motivational variables. This refers to situations that might organically come up within the course of a day. The example of Sally was, she was kind of hungry, perhaps thirsty, someone maybe needing a break, someone wanting to engage in some kind of physical activity. Just in our natural interaction within a day, there are things that we want or need. And when you're working with an individual, you kind of get to know the signs that someone wants or needs something. So you could wait for those moments where there's natural motivation and make sure that there's access to the AAC device. And then we could simply measure in those moments, is the individual engaging in an independent request, an independent demand for the change, the stimulus, the item, activity that would be specified by that situation. Another way to approach the complexity related to motivational variables is by altering the environment and actually engineering a motivational variable. For example, in the example of a man that I gave earlier with Glenn, there was a task that the individual was engaging in. And we could create the opportunity where someone's engaging in a task, but perhaps some item necessary to complete the task is not immediately present. So we have this arts and craft activity, and perhaps there's a red crayon or a red marker or scissors or tape that are needed. And we've moved those things away. We've created a motivation, perhaps, and we could observe in the moment where there's this need, does the individual independently engage in the request for the specified item? The basic formula for MAND instructions follows. It basically is depicted here. In the context of the motivational variable, we would deliver a prompt. A prompt is a supplemental stimulus that's designed to nudge behavior. And the reason that we need a prompt is typically because the natural condition alone is not sufficient to evoke the response. So in the context of a motivational variable, one that's organic or one that's created, the instructor, the listener, the therapist could deliver a prompt. A common prompt for an AAC user might be a point prompt with time delay fading. That's where we're using our finger, we're pointing to the icon specified by the motivational variable, and the time delay fading is where over multiple consecutive sessions, we would insert a delay between the opportunity to respond and the prompt being provided. This is not a talk on prompting, but prompting is incredibly important, and it's really, really critical that we get prompting right. When we don't get prompting right, we create prompt dependence, which to anyone who has been doing this work for any amount of time, you've seen the effects of prompt dependence. Okay, so we create the condition for the behavior. We deliver a prompt. When the behavior occurs, it's important then that we deliver the change, the reinforcer, the stimulus specified by the selection. This is really the defining quality of a mand, and this is the way to create a functional mand. That is, there's motivational condition, the behavior occurs, and then immediately after the behavior, to the greatest extent possible, we're creating the conditions specified by that touch or by that icon. And then we also want to call attention to that we want to systematically fade the prompt. If I had another hour with you, if I had like 3 hours, maybe we could talk about prompt fading in greater detail. But I just want to say, and I'll say it again, it is very, very important that as we go into any instructional programming, we know what the effective prompts are for the individuals we're working with, and we have a very, very clear plan as to how we are going to fade those prompts. Failure to do so, programming with capricious prompting is going to result in prompt dependency, which is a very difficult thing to then work through. Let me give you then a very clear example. Let's imagine we're working with an individual and we've identified a task that is perceived to be difficult or challenging, but something that the individual regularly contacts in their day-to-day life. And we've also assessed that the individual we're working with doesn't really have a way to say like, hey, can you like back off or can you leave me alone for a little while? So we've determined that it'll be beneficial to teach an individual to ask for a break. How do we do that? The first thing we'd want to do is recreate the motivational condition. So perhaps we would present that challenging or difficult task to create the variables that would make this behavior meaningful and functional. And then we would very quickly engage in the specified prompting procedure. That might be a point prompt again. And then when the individual engages in the icon selection, here, I had an animation. Here, pressing the break icon, we would deliver the consequence, the experience specified by that request, which might be the immediate removal or termination of that difficult task for a period of time. If we did this just one time, we've only done it one time. It'll likely take multiple trials, multiple experiences for an individual to learn the relationship between the motivational variable, the behavior, and then the consequence. But all three components have to be intact to create a functional form of communication. And again, as soon as we're able to, we want to systematically fade the prompt. I want to provide a few additional considerations and caveats that are really specific to an AAC device. And this is where it's important to say again that the individuals we work with, they're individuals and should be treated as such. There should be no default. We should be developing programming that's truly best based on what we've learned about the individual. I've worked with individuals where the response effort is a significant factor as to whether the communication response will occur or not. But response effort you could think of as referring to the total amount of energy necessary to engage in a target behavior. Every day of your life, you kind of engage, you deal with the question of response effort, whether you know it or not. After this workshop is going to be about 8 o'clock. I'm probably going to move over there and hang out with the family, and maybe I'll watch some TV. And I might even want a snack at that point. But that's all the way downstairs. And although I really want a stack, I don't want one so much that I'm going to get up and go downstairs. So we could imagine a snack functioning as a reinforcer, but because of the response efforts too high, I might not engage in the behavior. Let's say we're working with an individual, and music, as depicted by this icon, is a really powerful reinforcer, something they're motivated by. Let's look at all the actions they have to engage in to get to this icon. If in the device, the icon for music is buried within 4 different clicks or different folders, doesn't seem like a lot of effort, but this just may be enough that the individual is less likely to independently ask for music. Again, this is very individual, this is very idiosyncratic, but it's important we take into account the variable of response effort. For individuals for whom this has been a consideration, I've worked with the SLP and we've rearranged and reorganized the format so that those most requested, most preferred, most important things were easily accessible, even just straight from the homepage. Another consideration is many of the devices come with a default layout or setup, and there's nothing inherently wrong with this. And this was a point that I think maybe our second presenter made, Dawn, when we started the series. The device itself should be individualized, and it sounds weird that I even have to say that, because everything we do is individualized. I have noticed, and I think many of you have noticed, a hesitancy to perhaps change the device from the default, and this is a faulty notion. These communication systems are the systems that our clients use. It's their system. It should be designed in a way that is best for them. It is most efficient for them. And so this next point really depends on the learner. This is very idiosyncratic. Uh, if an individual has a device that's full of icons, full of options, but our assessments, our time with them, our experience has conclusively demonstrated that they really can only interact meaningfully with a small number of these available options, it's possible that all of these other icons could be distractors and could actually make communication more difficult. There are times in which I've worked with the SLP to kind of really slim down the icons that are available, especially when individuals engage in challenging behavior and there's a real need to very quickly be able to communicate wants and needs. Consider this in context of those you work with. There are some individuals you work with who can engage in like emergent behavior. That means that they might have an experience, and from that experience, they can generalize or derive other outcomes, like other behavior comes from the experiences. Some individuals we work with need further instruction, educational opportunities before that kind of emergent behavior arrives. And in those situations, to have a device full of defaults could make communication actually harder than it needs to be. A question that I see many teams struggle with, especially related to requesting preferred items, is to go down the path of teaching a generalized mand. What I mean there is teaching one icon for multiple different outcomes. So here we have this sort of amorphous cookie, and we could imagine the individual likes 10 different kinds of cookies. And we're trying to teach them that when you press this cookie icon, you get one of these 10 different kinds of cookies. It's a generalized mand. Or we can go down the path of teaching more specific mands, where we teach the individual to select icons associated with each individual cookie. Which option do you think is best here? Now, before anyone attempts to answer my question, let me just say first that it's a bad question. It's the wrong question. The idea that one of these is best is failing to recognize the individual. So I put this to you as a clinical decision. recognize that there are times and situations where it might be maximally beneficial to teach a broader, more generalized man. However, when we empower an individual to engage in verbal behavior with greater specificity, that just allows a more nuanced and subtle interaction with the environment. I think as teams supporting individuals who are using AAC, we should be moving towards more specific forms of verbal behavior when possible, when appropriate. This just allows greater ability to navigate the experience with precision. Um, I wish I could see you all as I put this to you as a question. Um, how many of you have been in a situation where you've heard a therapist, a well-meaning therapist, a well-meaning teacher? I'm not trying to be divisive here. These people have great intent. Say something like, "Tell me what you want." I've seen situations where the student, the client, the user of AAC won't even communicate until someone basically says, "Tell me what you want." Now, my message here is not that "tell me what you want" as a phrase is a bad thing. Don't walk away with that. Um, I want to call your attention to this form of prompt being one that could very quickly lead to a kind of dependence and can also create the situations for a faulty mand. If I were to ask any of you by name, "What do you want?" without even intending to, perhaps, I've created a demand. And you might engage in a behavior just because that's your learning history. If someone's asking you something, you might answer it, whether you really want it or not. So this just is another illustration how we have to be very careful, thoughtful, and planful when developing instructional programs to teach an individual to engage in functional mands. Um, be careful with the phrases, the kind of prompts that you use to ensure decrease the likelihood of creating a certain kind of dependence. We're now going to make like a hard turn. We're putting mands over there, and we're going to talk about tacts now. Um, Tacts are basically the fancy word behavior analysts use to describe naming and labeling things. Why we use those terms, that would require a history lesson. That's not going to happen today. When someone labels or names some aspect of their physical environment, they're tacting. A tact is how we communicate with each other to create shared experiences about the physical environment. When you're talking to a loved one, to a client, when you're just out there in the world, a large part of your verbal repertoire are tacts or descriptions of the experiences that you have. A tact is best thought of as a relationship between a physical stimulus, and here I'd be more specific and say a non-verbal stimulus, and some kind of verbal behavior. So here we have imagine Glenn is working is out in a community setting, and he sees a pair of scissors on a rack. Glenn picks up his device and he presses the button scissors. This could be interpreted in many different ways, but perhaps Glenn is just trying to tell us about his experience with the world. He's just trying to tell us that, "Hey, I see a pair of scissors over there." Tacts are reinforced typically by social social reinforcers, attention, generalized condition reinforcers. When I describe my world to you, when I say, "Wow, what a beautiful day it is outside," that's a tact. And your response of saying, "Oh, yeah, it really is a beautiful day," or, "Oh, I didn't really think about that earlier. It's gorgeous out." Those are the kind of consequences, those are the kind of experiences that maintain a tact repertoire. Now, before I go further, to any of my colleagues who are well versed in the analysis of verbal behavior, I do recognize that the example provided is not a pure tact. There's a lot of discussion as to whether the selection of an icon could be counted as a tact. I'm not going to get into that sort of theoretical discussion. I certainly recognize that it might not be a pure tact and it might be under multiple control of other stimuli. But I think the point is it's a tact in spirit. It's still a way of describing one's experience with the world. You saw my son as a teenager. This is when he was much cuter. He was about 2.5 years old here, and he learned, he learned the name truck, bus, airplane, and I distinctly remember driving with my son in the back seat. I'm driving; he's in the back seat, and every time a big truck would drive by, he would call out what we were observing. Every time an airplane would fly overhead, he would label it. And as someone who was studying verbal behavior, I'm like, this is fascinating. I wasn't like trying to teach him to do this. This all happened very naturally. And what my son was essentially doing was just telling me about his world. And every time my son said, city bus, airplane, dump truck, as a dad, I would say, yeah, that's a dump truck. You're right. That's a big dump truck. And so my son engaged in these verbal descriptions of his world. And as a result, I engaged with him socially. We talked about it. And that was a very organic kind of consequence that maintained that behavior. When it comes to prior to developing instructional programs to teach a tact, again, it's important we start with assessment. Here, our assessment should focus on the areas such as, can the person name the relevant people in their lives? Can they name the places that they frequently visit and the things they frequently interact with? I would strongly encourage to start here in your assessment of the tact repertoire. There may be other domains that you feel are equally as important, but the point is we need to be careful with what we select and really focus on teaching those things that are most meaningful, most important first, and perhaps getting to those secondary or tertiary things later. The way that we could conduct a tact assessment, very broadly speaking, is we would present the physical stimulus. This is my, oh, that doesn't work with the background blurred out. Okay. Well, you could imagine I'm holding a cup in my hand, and I could say, what is this? And I could measure, does the person label, do they tact, do they select the corresponding icon? And I could go through a wide range of stimuli, the things that really matter, the people, the places, the things that are most relevant, and evaluate what tacts are currently in the repertoire. I wouldn't want to take resources and start teaching something if I didn't know that it wasn't there. On the same hand, I would really want to focus my instruction on those most important things first. It makes sense that in our instructional programming, we often focus on the modality of vision, of sight, of seeing things, but that isn't the only way that we interact with our world. I encourage you, as is appropriate, this might not be where you start your programming, but this might be where you extend your programming in the future. Consider that our interaction with the world goes so much further than just what I see. That's important, but that's not it. What I hear, what I smell are also very important aspects of my experience. And to the extent that I want to share my experience with you, to be able to tact things that I see and smell may be an important consideration. So consider, as you are assessing and developing tact training programs, consider to evaluate these other modalities. Perhaps we have an individual, shut their eyes. This could almost be like a game. They shut their eyes. We put a little piece of food in their hand. They eat the food. And the question is, what does it taste like? What are you eating? It'd be really interesting to see if a person could point to something that looks like an orange and say orange, but if they can't taste an orange and say orange, that's an opportunity for us to teach something that really helps someone more fully interact with their world. The basic formula to teach a tact is as follows, and I try to really make this simple and pare it down. Um, so the primary context for a tact is the physical stimulus. So in attempting to assess or teach a tact, we would actually have the physical stimulus with us. And here we're going to need two different kinds of prompts. The first prompt I'm going to call an instructional prompt. And this is the prompt that basically tells the listener, I'm sorry, tells the learner that this is now the time where you are supposed to label what you're seeing here. It's important that we include this instructional prompt for educational purposes, because what we don't want to teach is the behavior of just naming things in the environment. Rather, we want that behavior, at least for instructional purposes, to happen under the situation of maybe asking a question of like, hey, what is this? What am I holding? What are you looking at? So that's the instructional prompt. The second prompt I'm going to call a response prompt. And this is the prompt that's designed to nudge behavior. And I'm going to give you an example in just a little while. Again, we'd probably use something like a gestural prompt with time delay fading. Uh, there's a very subtle change on this screen. I'm not sure if you noticed it. I'll do it again. So here we have two different kinds of prompts. And once again, I'll call attention to that we'll need to fade out the response prompt. If we don't, we're very quickly going to result in prompt dependence. Let me give you now an example. So here's the setup. I might have a screwdriver in my hand, and I deliver the instructional prompt. This is that's the part of the prompt that I may actually keep in for a period of time, because again, for instructional purposes, it's not necessarily adaptive that someone learns just to label everything all the time. Labeling typically comes under control of, hey, what's that? What are you holding? After I say this is I might engage in a point prompt where I'm pointing to the icon. Here, that's the screwdriver icon. The individual presses the icon, and then I reinforce that with some kind of educational or generalized reinforcer. Like, yeah, that's right. That's the screwdriver. Nice job. What's really important here is we don't reinforce this behavior with then the screwdriver. If we did that, then we're conditioning a mand, which a mand is great, but it's not a tact. I want to say a few more things as we wrap up, and then I want to have some time for question and answer. My students will ask me like, "Hey, what prompting procedure should I use, or what's the best prompting?" And I wish there was a singular answer to that question. Um, the best prompt is one that is ultimately effective, but as minimally intrusive as possible. And research has shown this in time and time again. I think your own clinical experience has probably borne this out. The best prompting procedure is often idiosyncratic, meaning it's often what's best for the individual. I strongly encourage, before going into any instructional procedure, to consider even doing an evaluation of different prompting methods to find the best one for the individuals you work with. Prompting is such an important part of establishing a verbal repertoire. Although this is not a talk about prompting, you will find that the instructional procedures we've talked about are just that much easier and more effective in the context of efficient prompting. The goal of a prompt is just a subtle nudge to the target behavior, with eventual plans to have the natural stimuli basically take over. If we are too quick to prompt, if we're not quick enough to fade the prompt, we're very likely to create that dreaded situation of prompt dependency. To do this requires a very direct and explicit approach. I said this earlier, it bears repeating now. A capricious system of prompting is going to result in prompt dependence. Prompting should be systematic and programmed, and that often requires collecting data. It often requires collecting data on what prompt level we're at and how far along are we in the fading procedure. So again, not a talk on prompting, but I just wanted to stress that. Uh, it's important that when we teach any skill, we do so in a way that promotes the longevity of that skill. What a sad story of taking any amount of resources and teaching a skill only to have that skill only exist in the therapeutic setting. What a waste of resources, perhaps. Um, it's important that from the very onset of the program, we select skills that are likely to contact natural contingencies, that we teach in ways that promote generalization. Any program that we're implementing should have embedded in it explicit ways, explicit mechanisms that will facilitate and promote generalization. Just so we're all on the same page, I think we are. When I say generalization, I basically mean the behavior occurring across multiple settings and situations where it would be appropriate. The way we can do this with an AAC user is to, one, make sure that that individual is interacting with multiple listeners. If I have a client and they're only ever using the AAC device with me, and we've developed this great rapport, I'm super responsive to their tacts and their mands, but then they go home and never use the system, that's a sad story. Um, we can help facilitate generalization by systematically programming different communication partners, different listeners, um, in a way as to ensure that these new verbal behaviors occur across a range of various settings and conditions. One of the easiest and most important things we could do to promote generalization is teach things that really matter most to the person. Um, this might have been implicit. I'm going to make it explicit now. If we teach an individual to request the most important things in their life, that action automatically ties into natural systems of reinforcement. You're not going to really have to do a whole lot to maintain that as long as people are being good faith listeners. But if we're teaching things that don't matter to the person, we're going to need other systems of reinforcement and motivation to maintain those behaviors. Focus on teaching those things that really matter most, those things related to health and happiness and well-being. And then we can always teach those other skills to allow the individual to have more interaction with their world and their environment. I am proud of myself in that I actually kept it to just about an hour. um, I wanted to have a few minutes for Q&A. So I think we have about 10 minutes to discuss any questions, thoughts, reactions that you have. I do want to thank all of you for being here. I'm so grateful for your participation in this event and the series more broadly. So I'm going to turn to the other panelists and see if there are any questions, any points that I could clarify.
I would just add there were a couple clarifiers that we put in the chat. A lot of it was just vernacular between like the functional independence that you were talking about, that a lot of times SLPs might refer to that as communicative functions, and some pieces along the way. But yeah, I think it really resonated. And I actually, we are wrapping up and we do have to wrap up, but I felt like the last slide with generalization that you were talking about, that could be a topic all of its own. It could be another hour presentation on its own, because it really is challenging to get the buy-in, and then also figure out how do you move it. Really kind of, you're not just trying to set the individual up for success, but you're also trying to set up the communication partner for success. And sometimes that's a really challenging kind of dance to do.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. the the work that we're doing collaboratively, it's life changing. It truly is. And when we can get past the differences in language, and really make this about serving a person, helping the people we work with develop the most robust, efficient, effective modes of communication, we can sort of put the differences in jargon aside, and sometimes it becomes really fun, like explaining things to each other, like, oh, you call it this, I would call it that. um every single time I've had those conversations, I find that we're far more on the same page than not. um yeah, thank you, Aaron.
Yeah. So we can hang on for another couple minutes if other questions do come up. But I just want to say thank you to anybody who joined live or asynchronously. Um, Let us know through the email if you have any difficulty accessing the information to earn your CEUs. And we hope to see you attending or viewing later some of our other webinars that are available. Have a great night and thanks.
Thank you.